My name is Chloe K. I'm 27. When my phone buzzed that morning, it wasn't even a call. It was a message from Daniel, sent at 7:18 a.m. while I was standing in my kitchen with my coffee going cold in my hand. One long paragraph. No greeting, no softness. Just him saying he couldn't do this anymore, that too much didn't add up, that he needed distance, that he hoped I'd understand. I remember noticing how calm his typing looked. Proper punctuation, no typos, like he'd already rehearsed it. I didn't answer right away. I sat on the edge of the counter and scrolled back up through our last conversation from the night before, where everything had still seemed normal. I had sent a photo of my dinner. He reacted with a heart. That was it. 10 minutes later, another message came through. Shorter this time. He said Mara had told him something at her birthday that he couldn't shake, something about me and her brother, something he said she was too shaken to invent. I stared at the screen, waiting for my body to catch up to what I was reading. My chest didn't tighten. My hands didn't shake. I just felt very still, like the air had thinned. I typed back that it wasn't true, just that. No explanation, no defense. His response took longer. When it came, it wasn't a question. It was him saying he didn't know who to believe and that the fact I was being so calm made it harder. That was when I understood that whatever had started at that party wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. It had already moved past me. I tried calling Mara, straight to voicemail. I tried again, same thing. I sent a single text asking what she'd said to him. It stayed unread. By mid-afternoon, Daniel stopped replying altogether. I went into work anyway. I answered emails. I sat through a meeting. I remember nodding at the wrong moments. When I finally got home, I noticed I still had my shoes on an hour later. That night, I opened my laptop and pulled up our shared photo folder without really knowing why. I didn't find anything new. I wasn't expecting to, but I saved a copy of everything anyway. Then I took screenshots of the messages from that morning and backed them up to a folder I never thought I'd need. At the time, it felt unnecessary, almost paranoid. I didn't realize then what that small decision would end up triggering. The next few days settled into something uncomfortable but quiet. Daniel didn't block me. He didn't argue either. His messages came spaced out, usually late at night, like he'd been sitting with the thought for hours before letting it escape. He asked the same questions in slightly different ways. Where exactly had I been at Christmas? How long had I stayed? Why he'd never noticed anything before if nothing had happened. I answered each one once. Briefly, always the same facts. I didn't embellish. I didn't beg him to believe me. When I was done typing, I put my phone face down and went back to whatever I'd been doing. He noticed that too. At one point, he said it felt like I was holding something back, that if I had nothing to hide, I'd be fighting harder. I didn't respond to that at all. Mara still hadn't answered me. I called once more, not back to back, just once early in the evening. It rang until it cut off. A minute later, her profile picture disappeared from my chat list. She hadn't blocked me entirely, but she'd restricted me enough that I could feel it. The silence wasn't passive, it was shaped. On the third day, Daniel asked if I'd spoken to her. I said no. He replied that she was really struggling and that she'd been crying when she told him what she'd seen. He said she didn't want to get involved, but she couldn't watch him be lied to. I let that sit for several hours before replying. When I finally did, I asked him if he'd reached out to her brother directly. The message stayed unread for most of the afternoon. When he answered, it was just one sentence. He said he didn't think that would help and that he didn't want to drag more people into it. After that, the tone shifted. His messages grew shorter, less curious, more resolved. I stopped initiating contact altogether. Instead, I started paying attention to what was happening around me, who was quiet, who was suddenly careful with their words. A mutual friend canceled lunch without suggesting another time. Another sent a vague message about hearing things and hoped I was okay. I didn't correct anyone. I didn't offer context. I said I was fine and changed the subject. That weekend, Mara finally called. I let it ring twice before answering. Her voice sounded thin and rehearsed, like she'd practiced saying my name out loud. She told me she was sorry it had come to this, that she never wanted to hurt me, that she only spoke up because she couldn't live with herself if she stayed quiet. I asked her calmly what she thought she'd seen. She didn't answer that directly. She said I was deflecting. She said it felt like I was trying to make her doubt her own memory. She said that was manipulative. When I asked her again, more specifically, where she'd seen me and when, she went quiet. Then she said she wasn't doing this with me and ended the call. I didn't call back. That night, Daniel sent a message saying he needed space, that the situation was making him feel unstable, that he didn't know who I was anymore. I read it once, then archived the chat. It wasn't a dramatic decision. It just felt like the only way to stop reacting to something I couldn't control. The break didn't come with a conversation. It arrived the way everything else had, in writing. 3 days after his last message, Daniel sent a single line saying he thought it would be best if we took some time apart. No timeline, no conditions, just space. I read it while standing in line at the pharmacy, the basket heavy in my hand for no real reason. I typed back that I understood. That was the first moment something in the situation shifted, even if I didn't name it at the time. The pressure eased. Not because things were resolved, but because I stopped being an active participant in the confusion. I didn't tell anyone we were on a break. I didn't change my routines either. I still went to work early. I still stopped at the same place for lunch, but I started noticing the edges of things more clearly. One evening, while I was half watching a show, my phone lit up with a notification from Instagram. It was a tagged photo from Mara's birthday that hadn't been there before. I opened it without thinking. Daniel was in the frame. It wasn't a revealing picture, just the two of them at the edge of the room, close enough that their shoulders touched. His arm angled behind her back, not fully around her, but not neutral either. The timestamp said it had been posted that afternoon. I scrolled through the rest of the set. There were more, none of me. I didn't react right away. I set my phone down and finished the episode, though I couldn't tell you what happened in it. When the credits rolled, I picked the phone back up and took a screenshot of the post. Then I checked the date on my calendar and counted the days since the party. It hadn't been long. That night, I didn't sleep much. Not because I was spiraling, but because my mind kept returning to small details I'd dismissed before. How easily the story had traveled. How neatly I'd been removed from it. The next morning, I moved a folder on my laptop from personal to archived and renamed it with the date. Inside it, I placed the screenshot from Instagram alongside the messages I'd already saved. It still felt like overkill, like something I might never need. But for the first time since this started, I wasn't waiting to see what would happen next. Once I stopped reacting in real time, the past stopped feeling distant. Mara and I had been friends since our mid-20s, long enough that most people assumed permanence. We didn't talk every day, but we were folded into each other's lives in a way that didn't require maintenance. She knew my routines. I knew her family dynamics. We had holidays, birthdays, shared group chats that went quiet for months and then suddenly lit up again. Nothing about our friendship had ever felt competitive, at least not openly. When I started seeing Daniel the year before, she'd been warm in a way that seemed generous. She asked practical questions. She remembered small details about him. When she met him for the first time, she pulled me aside afterward and said he seemed steady, that I'd found a good one. There were moments that didn't quite land, but I'd written them off at the time. Comments framed as jokes. Little observations about how men like him didn't usually stay long. Once, after a group dinner, she'd said something about how I always seemed to land on my feet without trying. It hadn't sounded bitter, just factual. The night of her birthday had felt the same. Loud, crowded, unremarkable. I'd left Daniel at the table to find the bathroom and ended up stopped by someone I hadn't seen in years. The conversation stretched longer than I'd meant it to. When I came back, both of their chairs were empty. I remember scanning the room, feeling a flicker of annoyance more than concern. I found Daniel near the bar not long after. He didn't seem flustered. If anything, he was unusually quiet, like his attention was split. I didn't ask why. Christmas had been equally ordinary. Her brother had been there briefly, passing through town. We said hello, exchanged a few polite words, nothing private, nothing memorable enough to catalog. What stood out now was how easily that nothing had been repurposed. In the days after the accusation surfaced, I tried to understand how the story had gained traction so quickly. Why Daniel had accepted it without verifying anything. Why Mara had positioned herself as reluctant but righteous, and me as evasive without ever naming specifics. I realized there had been a pattern I hadn't questioned before, how often Mara framed herself as the person who noticed things others missed. How she spoke with certainty about people's intentions. How she bristled when anyone challenged her version of events. I'd trusted that voice because it had never been turned on me. Until it was. The doubt didn't arrive all at once. It seeped in through repetition. Daniel called 2 nights after I'd archived the chat. His voice sounded careful, like he was trying not to tip the scale one way or the other. He said he wasn't accusing me of anything. He just needed to understand how 2 people could see the same situation so differently. I asked him what exactly she'd told him. He paused, then he said she'd been very specific, but that repeating it felt unfair. That it wasn't his place to relay something that had clearly been hard for her to say. I didn't argue with that. I just told him the version she was protecting wasn't real. That was when he asked why she would lie. It wasn't a challenge, it was genuine confusion. The kind that assumes the premise is solid and only the explanation is missing. I said I didn't know. That answer seemed to frustrate him more than any denial could have. He kept circling back to the same idea, that she had nothing to gain, that she looked shaken, that she'd waited months before saying anything. When I reminded him that her brother lived abroad and hadn't even been in town during the time she claimed, he said that timelines could be misunderstood. That memory was tricky. I asked again if he'd considered asking his brother directly. He said he didn't want to put Theodore in an uncomfortable position, that it would make things worse. After that, the questions stopped being questions. They turned into observations, that I seemed distant, that I wasn't reacting the way he expected, that if roles were reversed, he'd be doing more to convince me. I listened, I answered when something required a factual response. When it didn't, I let the silence stretch. The last call ended with him saying he needed to think, and that my calmness made him feel like he was missing something important. Like there was a piece of me he'd never known. When the line went dead, I sat there for a while with the phone still pressed to my ear, not because I was shocked, but because I was trying to understand when defending myself had turned into something that looked suspicious. The following day, I noticed Mara had posted a long caption about honesty and difficult truths. No names, plenty of comments. I didn't interact with it. By then, it was clear the doubt didn't belong to me anymore. It had been placed, fed, and protected somewhere else. The space he asked for turned into distance I didn't get to define. A few days passed without any contact. Then, late one evening, a message came through saying he thought it would be healthier if we paused things completely. He said he felt torn every time we talked, that the situation was affecting his sleep, that he needed clarity before he could be fair to either of us. I replied once, telling him I understood and that I wouldn't reach out unless he did. After that, the days went quiet in a way that felt deliberate, not empty, just narrowed. I noticed it first with small things, a group chat that had gone active without me, a coworker who asked if I was okay but didn't wait for the answer, an invitation that came late, already half decided. When I ran into a mutual friend at the grocery store, she hugged me a little too tightly and said she'd heard things were complicated. She didn't ask what happened. She said she hoped everyone was healing. I said I hoped so too. Daniel stopped watching my stories. Mara didn't. Hers kept appearing at the top of my feed, unmuted, like nothing had shifted. Photos of coffee dates. A caption about leaning on the right people when life gets hard. I didn't mute her. I didn't block her either. I just stopped opening the app as often. 3 days after the break message, Daniel sent another text. Short. Direct. He said he didn't think he could move forward with so much uncertainty between us, that even if nothing physical had happened, the doubt itself had changed how he saw things. He said it was better to end it now than keep circling the same questions. There was no call, no discussion, just a clean sentence followed by a pause where I was clearly expected to respond. I read it twice, then once more an hour later. When I answered, I thanked him for being honest and told him I wished him well. That was it. The next morning, I woke up to find I'd been removed from a shared album we'd created months earlier. The title had been changed. I didn't check what it was. By then, it was clear I wasn't just losing a relationship. I was being edited out of a version of events that no longer needed me present. The story didn't stay contained for long. About a week after the breakup message, Sydney texted me asking if I wanted to grab coffee. The phrasing was careful, like she was bracing for something. When we met, she talked for a while about work before finally saying she felt awkward bringing this up, but she'd been hearing my name a lot. I didn't interrupt her. She said Mara had been telling people that I'd been unhappy for months, that I'd grown distant from Daniel and used her brother as an excuse to walk away without looking like the bad guy. That Mara had only stepped in to support him when he was blindsided. Sydney said it like she was reciting something she'd already heard twice. When she finished, she waited for me to react. I told her it wasn't true, just that. No details, no corrections. She nodded, but not fully. She said she didn't know what to believe anymore, that the situation sounded messy on all sides, that Mara seemed genuinely hurt. I paid for my coffee and changed the subject. We didn't make plans to see each other again. Later that week, I saw the confirmation I'd been avoiding. Mara posted a photo of herself and Daniel together, standing close, his hand resting on her waist. The caption talked about unexpected connections and finding comfort after loss. The date stamps didn't line up with the version she'd been telling. Daniel confirmed it when I asked, politely, if they were together. He said yes, that it wasn't something he planned, that they'd bonded over losing someone they both trusted. He said he hoped I could respect that and move on. I didn't argue, I didn't send screenshots, I didn't point out timelines. What I did do was drive to Mara's apartment 2 days later. She opened the door only partway. Her expression tightened when she saw me, like she'd been expecting this but not so soon. I asked if we could talk. She said there was nothing left to say. I told her I needed to understand why she'd chosen to tell that story. She didn't deny it. She said she saw what she saw, that I was projecting because I needed someone to blame, that I should reflect on my own behavior instead of attacking her integrity. When I asked her again for specifics, for anything concrete, she said I was crossing a line and closed the door. I stood there for a moment longer than I needed to, then I left. By then, it was clear the narrative was already moving without me. Correcting it would have required shouting over people who'd already decided where the truth lived. After that, I stopped trying to fill in the gaps with logic. If there was an explanation, it wasn't going to come from the people repeating the story. I went back through old messages, not obsessively, just methodically. Conversations with Mara that stretched back months. Photos from group trips. Nothing pointed to an affair. Nothing even hinted at dissatisfaction. The absence of evidence didn't calm me, but it did steady me. What caught my attention instead was how often another name started appearing in her posts after the breakup. Her cousin Lena. She'd always been around, loosely. Holidays, occasional dinners. But now she was everywhere tagged in photos, sitting between Mara and Daniel at gatherings, commenting inside jokes under their posts. It wasn't suspicious on its own. It was just new. I didn't reach out to her. A week later, I was out with coworkers at a bar near the office, the kind of place where conversations blur together after a while. I was halfway through a drink when someone bumped into my shoulder hard enough to slosh it over the rim. Lena leaned in close, already laughing, already unsteady. She squinted at me like she was trying to place a face she half recognized. When she did, her expression shifted. She said my name slowly, then shook her head. She said the whole thing was weird, that it had been weird from the start, that she'd told Mara it felt wrong, and that planning things like that never ended cleanly. I asked her what she meant by planning. She waved a hand like she'd said too much, told me not to worry about it. That family stuff got exaggerated when people drank. Then she hugged me too tightly and drifted back toward her group. I stood there for a while after she left, replaying the phrasing in my head. Not the tone, the words. The next morning, I texted Sydney and asked if she'd ever noticed anything off about how Mara talked about Daniel before the breakup. She replied hours later saying she didn't think Lena was a reliable source and that drunk comments didn't mean much. I didn't push, That evening, I sent Lena a short message on Instagram. I asked if she'd be willing to meet for coffee, sober, just to clear the air. I didn't accuse. I didn't reference the bar. She didn't respond for 2 days. When she finally did, she said she didn't want to get involved and that Mara would be furious. Then, a few minutes later, she sent another message saying she felt sick about the whole thing and that she'd meet me, but only once. We picked a place neither of us went to often. When she arrived, she looked exhausted. She didn't order anything. She said she hadn't slept well. She told me she didn't think Mara would actually go through with it, that she'd complained for months about how unfair it felt watching me with Daniel, that she'd said things about how some people always ended up with the good ones without trying. When I asked her about the lie, she exhaled slowly. She said Mara chose her brother because he lived overseas and wouldn't find out until it was already done, that the birthday party wasn't an accident, that she wanted Daniel emotional and off balance when she told him. Then she opened her phone and turned it toward me. The messages were all there, dates, details, plans. I didn't react, I just asked if I could take screenshots. She nodded and looked away. I didn't read the messages all at once. I scrolled slowly, making sure the dates lined up, that the names were clear, that nothing depended on interpretation. Lena filled in gaps when I asked, but she didn't embellish. She stuck to what she knew and stopped when she reached the edge of it. She said Mara started talking about Daniel not long after the three of us had met for drinks the first time. At first it sounded like admiration. Then it shifted. Comments about how attentive he was, how she would never take that kind of effort for granted, how unfair it felt that some people ended up with stability while others kept getting lessons. The messages showed when the idea hardened. Early in the year, Mara outlining how she'd plant the doubt without sounding vindictive, how she'd waited long enough after Christmas that it would feel buried, how using her brother would make it unprovable without forcing direct confrontation. She wrote about wanting to be there for him afterward, about letting things unfold naturally once the relationship cracked. Lena admitted she'd pushed back at first, told Mara it was messy and cruel. She said she didn't think Mara would actually do it, that she assumed it was venting. By the time she realized it was real, the party had already passed. I took screenshots of everything, not just the most damning messages, but the mundane ones too. The ones that showed pacing, intent, planning. I saved them in multiple places, labeling them by date. When we stood up to leave, Lena apologized quietly, not dramatically, just once. I accepted it, there wasn't anything else to say. I didn't go home right away. I sat in my car and looked at the folder on my phone for a long time, then I closed it. That night, Daniel texted me for the first time in days. He asked if I was okay, said he'd been thinking about how things ended. I read the message, then locked my phone. For the first time since this started, I knew exactly what had happened. And I also knew I wasn't going to use that information the way anyone expected me to. I didn't answer Daniel's message. Instead, the next morning, I opened my contacts and searched his last name. I'd met his family enough times that their numbers were already there, saved without much thought. His mother, his 2 sisters, people I'd spent holidays with, people who'd welcomed me without hesitation. I created a group chat. I didn't write a long explanation. I said there was something I felt they needed to see and that I was sorry to involve them, but that I wouldn't be reaching out again after this. Then I attached the screenshots, all of them, in order. I put my phone down and went to work. When I checked it hours later, there were multiple responses. His mother asked if the messages were real. One of his sisters said she felt sick reading them. The other asked how long this had been going on. I answered factually, yes, months, I hadn't known until recently. That was it. Later that evening, Daniel called. I let it go to voicemail. Then he texted, angry this time, asking why I dragged his family into something that was between us. He said Mara was devastated, that his mother had banned her from coming over, that his sisters wouldn't speak to him until he explained himself. I replied once. I told him I hadn't dragged anyone into anything, that I'd corrected a lie that involved my name, that what his family did with the truth was out of my control. After that, I blocked his number. Over the next few weeks, the consequences settled in quietly. Mara stopped appearing in family photos. Her name disappeared from group dinners. When she did show up to public events, she was polite but peripheral, like someone waiting for permission that never came. I didn't monitor it closely. I didn't need to. The truth had reached the one place it couldn't be reframed. After that, I didn't reach out to anyone else. I didn't post anything online. I didn't explain. Mara's presence faded the way a shadow does when the sun finally shifts. She wasn't banned outright from every gathering, but she was peripheral. Her voice quieted in group conversations. Invitations stopped coming without announcement. People started filling spaces she used to occupy. She was still there, technically, but her access had been clipped. I returned to my routines. Morning coffee at the same corner cafe, walks along the river in the evenings. I didn't check social media obsessively anymore. I didn't wait for anyone to make a move. I simply existed in the space I'd reclaimed for myself. Every so often, a name would pop up, Mara, Daniel, Lena, and I'd pause briefly, taking note. Then I'd set the phone down. There was nothing left to do. No conversation left to have that would change the facts. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I simply noticed that the quiet had returned. Not the same quiet as before everything started, but a different kind, stable, contained, and finally mine. The situation had collapsed under its own weight. Mara's plan, meticulous and calculated, had been rendered ineffective by something she hadn't counted on. The evidence she left behind and the careful way I chose to use it. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel relieved in a rush. I felt steady, observant, certain, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't worry about what would happen next.